A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahushai, Bashem, Makakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquatim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai, and back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, there's going to be a bit of exhortation. When you better yourself, a lot of our people will despise you, right? And this is something that, and then you realize that the more that you walk, where the Lord actually intended us to walk, you know, the more you realize that a lot of our people, they'll despise you, they'll try to ridicule you, or you think he's better than me, and all this kind of stuff. You start to see that their spirit becomes agitated and becomes more offended by the way you walk. Even by even you not even saying anything, because the scriptures talk about how a man is known by the way he walks, the way he carries himself, right? So I kind of just wanted, this is just a bit of an exhortation, not to be, you know, overly bothered when these things arise, right? Because our people are going to be offended anyway, even if the fact that you don't even have to tell them something, they can feel it off of your presence because you represent Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? So, um, let me go to the Apocrypha real quick. Okay, this is Sirach 19, verse 29, and it says, "A man may be known by his look, and one that hath understanding by his countenance when thou meetest him. A man's attire, excessive laughter, and gait show what he is," right? So the way you conduct yourself, it shows a lot about you, right? And a lot of our people, they get offended by the way that we carry ourselves because we don't carry ourselves as pookies, as Ray Rays, or if you're a woman, we don't you don't carry yourself as the Nicki Minaj's or the Cardi B's and so on and so forth. You conduct yourself in the way the Lord actually intended us to be. And this is one of the things our people, they know they're wise to do evil, as the scriptures say, but to do good they have no knowledge, right? They when they see you and they conduct yourself in a certain way, a certain fashion, they get very riled up and very bothered by this. They might ask you and probe you with certain questions. For example, oh, or they might be surprised that when you tell them, like, oh, I don't smoke, I don't do this, or I don't do that, right? These sorts of things that irritates them in their spirit because these are things that they do. And essentially, as the saying in the world goes, misery likes company. But when you express and you tell them that you don't do those things, they look at you funny, they look at you strange because you manifest, a higher version of themselves, right? And a part of them, they can't, you know, instead of actually trying to learn more, our people are very, very quick to scoff and very slow to understand, right? Our people don't have that understanding of, like, okay, let me try and, put my ego aside and try and understand, okay, how could I be more like this person, right? Or in the spirit, we're trying to be more like Yahweh Shai, but the point is that, you know, they see it essentially as an attack on them. They can't separate their ego, you know, to be able to actually submit and understand, try and get understanding to better themselves, basically, right? Let me get that word gate actually in the etymology here. This is just a bit of an impromptu, but just a sense of encouragement, This is gate in the etymology, and it says a going or walking, departure, journey. It says way, road, path. Oh, look at this. Hold on. It says manner of walking, carriage for body of the body while walking, right? So there's a manner in the way we speak. There's a manner in the way you walk, right? It scriptures says in I think it's Peter's, what manner of conversation we ought to be in all godliness, to roughly paraphrase, right? And that conversation, our conversation is in regards to heavenly things, in regards to spiritual things. We're not conversating, on dead things. You know, what kind of blunt you're rolling tonight. We don't converse on these low level topics. This is a very base society, and our people don't understand that. Their levels of conversation it's so dim, right? It's so like low down, not just the way that they carry themselves, but their conversations, their minds are just so dim, because you know this is a very base kingdom with very base people with very base conversations, because you have somebody who's base that's ruling. Right. um okay, so let me go to, there's an account I kind of wanted to grab real quick. Actually, let me go to, hold on. Okay, so this is Judges chapter 6, verse 28. And the title here, it says, the altar of Baal destroyed, right? And it says, and when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it. And the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, hath done this thing. And then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. Right? So I'm reading this. So when you go into the story, the children of Israel, the Israelites, they were being besieged and they were taken over by the Midianites. So the Lord pretty much gave us into the hand of the Midianites, and they besieged us. They started controlling, a lot of the resources, and because we were sinning against the Lord, we were going a whoring after other gods, and the Lord, in response, gave us into the hands of the Midianites. Now, fast forward, the Lord raises up Gideon to rescue us, because essentially we've been punished, we've been chastised. We cried unto the Lord, and the Lord put the Spirit on Gideon. Gideon, eventually starts to cast down a lot of these wicked practices. I'm reading this because this is what Gideon was doing. He was taking down the things, he was getting rid of those things that were causing the Lord to have fury and anger towards us. This is the root of the problem. But our people, they were getting mad at somebody, who was trying to do right, but they couldn't conceptualize and understand that this is the root of the problem. They couldn't understand that, if you don't cast out these wicked practices, you're constantly going to be in this perpetual cycle of being judged, in a wicked sense. And a lot of our people don't understand the fact that, they have to come back. They don't understand the importance of the Lord's commandments and statutes. They think of it as something that's grievous. And here it is, they're in a position, when they're in a position, where they're constantly being afflicted, then they want to remember the Lord, right? So I'm reading this to show that, you know, our people were being upset by somebody who was trying to do the right thing, right? And they will, that's hold on, let me get that in Proverbs. Hold on, because in Proverbs it says, Proverbs, was that 17? This is Proverbs chapter 17, verse 15. And it says, He that justifieth the wicked, and, sorry, and that condemneth the just, even they both are abomination to the Lord, right? So it shows you the mindset, that the way these people were in. They were in the mindset of, you know what, I gotta condemn this guy. Where is this guy? He cast down the altars of Baal. But our people don't seem to understand that, you were just being afflicted. You don't seem to understand that the Lord was afflicting you, using the Midianites to do so, putting hell upon you, using another nation to do so because of this wickedness, right? And they didn't want to let go of those things, right? So when you start to let go of these things, this is the way they behave. They behave as niggas. They behave as people. They don't have any understanding. This is the way our people behave themselves as. That's why a lot of our people they're an abomination, because they don't have good judgment. Right? And here it is, you have a judge trying to take down and get rid of those wicked practices. Just like us, we get rid of a lot of those old ways, these old habits, that's dimming our vibration, right? And eventually, they start to kind of look at you with disdain. They start to look at you with disgust. That because they have a term for, well, they use it more for women. They call it a pick me, right? Because she's trying to ingratiate herself to please, like her husband, right? And that's the same thing, we as, Israelite men are doing. We're trying to make ourselves more pleasing in the eyes of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. But our people don't like that, right? So I'll get you another example. Where is it? Hold on. Because there's benefits when you're more in tune with Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, right? Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, Salaki brothers. Let me just I just want to get another example. Okay, this is Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, and it says, And it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 provinces, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because of an excellent spirit was in him. And the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So he had a lot of authority. He was very knowledgeable, in regards to prophecy. He was a very, very profitable in terms of asset, because he was able to break down the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Verse 4. here's the point, and it says, then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against concerning Daniel concerning the against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could not but they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Right? So you see, these other guys, they're looking around him, he's seeing the way he conducts himself, the way he works, and they're looking for some kind of fault, and that is one of the things I notice a lot of our people that that bothers them in their spirit, because they might have people in your workplace. You conduct yourself in a certain way, you're very well mannered, you're punctual, you don't use maybe a lot of slang. I mean, there's nothing wrong if you do. It just depends on who you speak with. But the point is, you move in such a way where people around you are trying to find fault with what it is you do, as opposed to actually being able to learn from the way you conduct yourself and what you do. Right? It shows you how backwards our people's mindset are, and it shows you how filthy this Babylonian black culture is, because it doesn't actually promote any sentiment of righteousness. To the point where our people are so wicked, to the point where they're looking for, faults, within you. They're looking for you to slip up. They're looking for your downfall, man. And it shows you. It shows you the mindset of these people, right? But I'm reading this to show that, when you conduct yourself in a certain way, a lot of it's going to your spirit is going to irritate a lot of these people's demons, right? It's just very, very important just to continue to remain cordial, to remain calm, to remain composed, and these are all attributes of a king, right? Very, remaining composed, emotional content, and then walking in uprightness, right? And that's another thing also. They might despise you because you're very, very knowledgeable in a particular subject. Like, how does this guy, know all this information? How does he know that? How come I don't know that? And they look at you, you're younger, and so on and so forth. It's kind of like very similar to the way they looked at Yahweh Shai, right? They kind of look down on you. Oh, is this the carpenter's son? You know what I'm saying? That's the way a lot of our people might look at you, right? The same way they looked at him, man. Isn't that Joseph's son? They look, as opposed to actually trying to, like, oh man, this guy is very interesting. Let me go talk to him. Here and there, you might have that, but the mass majority, they will be offended by the way you walk, right? But it just shows that you're in the right spirit, and continue to honestly to better yourself, right? The scriptures say that we are saved through grace by faith, right? We have a gift. It's a gift essentially, and we're using this gift to essentially refine ourselves and make ourselves more holy, more separate, from these people, because the way that they live doesn't actually bring forth any sort of life. It just brings forth death, decay, destruction. That's what all black culture does. That's all their music does. That's all it does to um as the way they live, right? I guess I'll end off with this one. One second. Oh, okay, let me go to Proverbs. Is that? This is Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4, and it says, he becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich, right? And it could be, this can be, be tied to and dealing with money, right? But you can also tie to like understanding, because, you study, you're making sure you read, train, pray, all these different facets. You cover all these different things to actually make yourself more rich with more understanding, like a farmer, basically. You spend a lot of time, digging up the soil, you look up words, you become essentially more well-rounded. King Solomon was very well-rounded. He could tell you about all these different, things, the creeping things, the fowls in the air, the types of herbs, and I think even Wisdom of Solomon, the seventh chapter goes into that, being more well-rounded, having be able to, have conversations with anybody that you encounter. That makes you more interesting. That changes your frequency. It changes your aura. Being in tune with Yahweh Bashem El Shai. I guess I'll end off with this one. I know it says ambassador. Hold on. I know it says that in there somewhere. It says 1 Corinthians 5:20, and it says, "Now then we are ambassadors for Hamashiach, Yahushai, as though the Most High Yahweh did beseech you by us. We pray you in Hamashiach's stead, ye be reconciled to the Most High." Right? So, an ambassador is someone who, that presents themselves in a certain way. Right? And, a lot of people, this will despise you, because you walk in a particular way. Right? But, you will have people who are also very, very drawn to you. So you get the negative and the both. And the scriptures say that, how it refers to, men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil, right? So these are the particular things that can happen, when you walk in a particular fashion, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but, Lord's will, as always, this was quick and just edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.